The Chicago Blackhawks are once again outside of playoff positioning in the NHL standings, and I think it's time for them to start making some moves and start unloading some guys at the trade deadline this year. So let's take a look at 5 players that the Chicago Blackhawks should trade before this year's deadline. Let's go. Hey everybody, so today we are going to be continuing my 5 players to trade series, and we are going to be looking at the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, Chicago this past offseason took some real home run swings with some of the moves that they made. Seth Jones, MarcAndre Fleury, Jake McCabe, and unfortunately for them, they struck out. And Chicago is not having a very good season this year. They're pretty far out of the playoff picture in the West, and certainly not going to be making the playoffs this season. So with that being said, it's time to start making some trades, start making some moves. And personally, I think Chicago needs to realize that they're not a very good team. They're not 1 or 2 moves away from being a very good team, and they kind of are going to have to strip it down a little bit and build back up before they get back to being a competitive team in the Western Conference. So today, we're going to take a look at 5 players that I think the Chicago Blackhawks should trade before the trade deadline this year. We'll talk about some reasons why, and these are guys that I think that they can move, and there will be interest in out there around the league as well. So let's get started. Let's take a look. And obviously, the top one that everyone is talking about right now, is Marc-Andre Fleury, 37-year-old goaltender, last year of his contract, and well, it seems like a lot of people want Marc-Andre Fleury to get traded to some playoff team, some sort of contender, and maybe take one last chance to get another Stanley Cup. He's certainly not going to get that in Chicago, and it really makes no sense for him to be kind of just wasting away in a non-playoff team like the Blackhawks, where, you know, this might be his last season. There's been a lot of Fleury retirement talk. This might be his last year, and a lot of people want to see him go to a contender and possibly get one last shot here at going through the playoffs and maybe getting another Stanley Cup. There's been a lot of talk about teams where he could possibly end up, because obviously for a starting goaltender, there's not a whole lot of options because most playoff teams already have their starting goaltender. Honestly, the clear choice seems to be the Edmonton Oilers. They're really kind of that one playoff team that has a big problem in net, and Marc-Andre Fleury would definitely be a huge upgrading goal for the Oilers. Seems like he doesn't want to go to Washington. The Capitals are another team that certainly could use an upgrading goal, but apparently, according to the reports, he's already said no to multiple trades to the Capitals because of their rivalry with Pittsburgh. He doesn't want to go there. And then another kind of potential, or something that came up, was him going back to Vegas, but then Vegas GM Kelly McCrimmon came out and said that that wasn't happening. Also, salary cap-wise, I don't think there'd really be any way for Vegas to be able to bring him back, so that one seemed like just a far-out rumor. Honestly, it seems like Edmonton would be the top choice and the most likely to happen here, but there may be another playoff team out there that could be looking for an upgrading goal, and Fleury could certainly fill that need, especially if Chicago was able to retain salary. It's only for the rest of this season, and let's just get Fleury onto a playoff team. There's really no reason for him to be wasting away in Chicago. Let's please get him on a playoff team so he can at least have one more chance to go for a Stanley Cup. Next up, we have defenseman Calvin DeHaan. He's a 30-year-old defenseman. In the final year of his contract, he'll be a UFA at the end of this year. He's making $4.55 million, which is a little bit steep of a price for what Calvin DeHaan is, which I think is kind of like a number 5 D-man. But obviously, Chicago could potentially retain salary in a deal here, and that would certainly increase the likelihood of this deal happening. And also, it's only for the rest of this year, so it's not like the retained salary is going to hurt Chicago going forward because it's up at the end of the season. And Calvin DeHaan is exactly the kind of defenseman that a lot of teams would love to add at the trade deadline. He'd definitely be a lower cost than a guy like John Klingberg, or a guy like, I mean, certainly lower than Jacob Chychrun or somebody like that. So this would be a little bit one of your lower cost options to add to your D-core. Again, I think he's kind of like a number 5 D-man. He's been playing in the top 4 with Chicago, but Chicago's D-core isn't to the same level as a lot of playoff teams around the league. I think on a good team, he's a number 5. But he could be a really good number 5 and a good depth addition for a lot of playoff-level teams around the league. So DeHaan is definitely a guy I think that will get traded. And, he's a guy that could certainly be an improvement on the back end for some teams around the league who are looking to add to that depth going into the playoffs. Next up, we've got center Dylan Strome. And this is an interesting one because he's only 24 years old. He's an RFA at the end of the season. He's making $3 million. And there's been a lot of trade talks surrounding Dylan Strome over the past couple of years because, quite frankly, he has just not performed the way that he was supposed to and hasn't developed the way that he was supposed to with the Chicago Blackhawks. When he first got traded to Chicago back in 2018-19, he put up 51 points in 58 games in his first year with the Blackhawks. Then he followed that up with 38 points, only 17 points last year, and so far this year he only has 21. So it's kind of been downhill for Dylan Strome after his first season in Chicago, and that's obviously led to a lot of trade rumors. His development hasn't really continued the way it was expected to, but he still is young at 24 years old, and I think that is why the interest from some other teams around the league would still be fairly high for Dylan Strome. He's not going to reach his top potential in Chicago. I think that's pretty clear at this point. As far as players around the league that would benefit from a change of scenery, I think Dylan Strome is pretty darn high on the list. So this may not be a trade deadline move. This may be something that would happen more towards the offseason. And maybe after the year is done. But I do think that there is a chance that a team would take a run at Dylan Strome at the deadline this year. He's still young. He's got upside potential. He's certainly a talented player, but it's definitely not happening for him in Chicago. He's gone pretty downhill in Chicago. So a change of scenery could be big here. I think there are some teams that would like to take a chance on a young player like Strome, and I would not be surprised if he gets moved at the deadline. And whether that's a package deal or something where, maybe he is the big addition, or maybe, there's a bigger deal to be worked in here. If you're a playoff team, maybe you want to add Strome in as maybe third line center, some secondary scoring, and you also add in Calvin DeHaan into that deal, and maybe DeHaan and Strome get packaged together, go to a playoff team for a big package back in return, and Chicago's able to move both. That's definitely something I could see happening as well. But I figure Strome's got to get moved at some point because he is not really performing with the Blackhawks. So I feel like they're probably going to move on from him whenever they can and get a decent return still for a 24-year-old that has some upside. Another guy that certainly still has some upside but has been diminishing his returns over the last couple years is Dominik Kubalik. He's a winger that can play both sides. He's on the last year of his contract. He's making $3.7 million. 26 years old, though, so he's still fairly young. He's certainly got some upside. He's shown that he can score goals in the NHL. Unfortunately for him, though, he scored 30 goals his rookie season in Chicago. He scored 30 goals. He scored 17 last year, and now this year he only has 10. So his goal scoring has dropped since each of the past 2 years since his rookie season. He's really never come close to reaching 30 again. And again, diminishing returns here for Kubalik in a Blackhawks uniform. So, pending RFA, last year of his contract, the kind of guy that teams want to add to their third line. If you're a team looking for secondary scoring and need a winger in your lineup, hello, Dominik Kubalik. He's shown upside, he's shown scoring ability, but it hasn't been working out with Chicago. He's kind of gotten pushed down the lineup a little bit. His production has really dropped off with the Blackhawks, but a lot of these good teams have that attitude of, you know, hey, we're going to play him with better players. We're a better team than the Blackhawks are. We can get more out of him than the Blackhawks can get out of him. And he might be able to come back and be a pretty decent producer for us. So I could see a lot of teams looking for that middle six winger type of guy, be in on Dominik Kubalik and try and get him back to scoring goals the way he was in his rookie season. And if you're Chicago, I'll be honest with you, I am more than happy to trade him at this point because his returns have diminished greatly over the past couple of years. And finally, last one, we've got a depth forward in Ryan Carpenter. He's 31 years old. He's a UFA at the end of the season. Pretty cheap contract, 1 year left, the rest of this year, $1 million. Definitely a depth guy that playoff teams like to add at the deadline. Fourth liner. Doesn't really give you much offensively. Only 7 points this year, but he can play with a bit of a gritty style, which is good for the fourth line, especially in the playoffs. He's not a bad defensive player. And all in all, I think he's the kind of fourth line addition that a lot of playoff teams like to make at the trade deadline. So, you know, if any team's out there looking for added forward depth, looking for another fourth liner, Ryan Carpenter could be the kind of guy that they take a flyer on, grab him for the rest of this year. There's no long-term commitment here. If he doesn't play well, he'll just be a UFA at the end of the season. And, you know, you can at least get some added depth for a postseason run if you are a playoff team. So those are 5 players, everybody, from the Chicago Blackhawks that I think they should trade at the trade deadline this season or before. And guys that, you know, for whatever various different reasons, either aren't working out in Chicago or are free agents at the end of the year, that they should move on, try and get something for. And, you know, see if they can get some decent assets in return in exchange for these guys that aren't producing well or are going to be gone at the end of the season anyway. And for other teams, I do think these guys provide value, whether it's in a depth role or whether it's in a more prominent, important role. These are all guys that can bring something to the lineup in one way or another for a team that's looking to load up for a playoff run. So that's what I've got on the Chicago Blackhawks, everybody. Thank you guys so much for watching. And with that, please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our merchandise store, membership, and donation links are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you guys soon.